Welcome to CertLab's updated AB-900 practice exam series. Microsoft published the revised study guide on June 22, 2026, for the exam skills measured beginning July 22, 2026. Every practice exam in the series was built from that updated objective set. These are original practice questions, not actual exam items. This is AB-900 Practice Exam 2, Data Protection and Governance, with 44 questions focused on Microsoft Purview, data protection, governance, compliance, and lifecycle controls. Here is how the practice test works. Read each scenario and answer choice carefully. When the silent 3-second countdown begins, pause the video if you need more time. Commit to your answer before the reveal. Then use the explanation and exam clue to understand both the correct choice and the distractor pattern. Question 1. An organization wants content in Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams to be retained for 5 years, even if users delete it, and then permanently deleted when the retention period ends. Which Microsoft Purview solution should an administrator use? Select one answer. Option A, Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Option B, Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management. Option C, Microsoft Purview Communication Compliance. Option D, Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. The correct answer is B, Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management. Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management is correct because retention policies are its core mechanism for retaining content in Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams for a defined period, and can combine retention with automatic permanent deletion afterward. Exam clue. When a requirement specifies how long information must persist and what must happen when that period ends, choose the lifecycle and retention capability rather than a classification, data movement, or communication review control. Question 2. An organization needs users to classify project documents and email as confidential. When the classification is applied, the content must display a footer, and only designated recipients must be able to open it. This requirement does not include setting a retention period or evaluating sharing attempts. Proposed solution. Create a Microsoft Purview sensitivity label scoped to files and email. Configure the label to apply a footer and encryption permissions, and publish the label to the users. Does the proposed solution meet all the requirements? Does the solution meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. The correct answer is A, yes. Yes is correct because sensitivity labels are designed to classify and protect content. For files and email, a label can add a footer and apply encryption permissions, satisfying both requested consequences without introducing a retention or DLP requirement. Exam clue. Match the control to the requested outcome. Use an information classification control when content must be visibly marked and persistently protected. Use lifecycle or data movement controls only when the requirement asks to retain or delete content or govern sharing activity. Question 3. A compliance team uses a built-in sensitive information type to classify documents and email across Microsoft 365. The detected documents are not encrypted. An administrator must open the detected items, see each item's location and name, and inspect the item's contents. The team does not need to review user labeling events or apply protection. What should the administrator do? Select one answer. Option A. Publish a sensitivity label that applies encryption to the detected items. Option B. Use Activity Explorer and filter the activity history for the sensitive information type. Option C. Use Content Explorer and assign the administrator both the Content Explorer List Viewer and Content Explorer Content Viewer role groups. Option D. Create a trainable classifier and train it with examples of the detected content. The correct answer is C. Use Content Explorer and assign the administrator both the Content Explorer List Viewer and Content Explorer Content Viewer role groups. Content Explorer lets an authorized administrator view the items represented by data classification summaries. Because the detected documents are not encrypted, Content Explorer can preview their contents. The List Viewer role group exposes each item and its location, and the Content Viewer role group exposes item contents and names that can themselves contain sensitive data. Assigning both role groups therefore satisfies every requested inspection capability without substituting an activity log, a new classification mechanism, or a protection action. Exam clue. Separate the mechanism that identifies content from the evidence view that lists and opens matches, from an activity log that records actions, and from controls that change how content is protected. Close any preview exceptions for the evidence surface, then grant only the viewing permissions required by the requested evidence depth. Question 4. A records manager at Northwind Traders needs item-level retention for contract documents. The manager creates a Microsoft Purview retention label that retains each contract for 7 years from its creation date and starts a single-stage disposition review at the end of that period. Auto-approval is not configured, and a designated reviewer must make the final disposition decision. Arrange the events in the life cycle of a contract that receives this label. Arrange the 4 events in the order they occur, from first to last. The available actions are: Option A. A designated reviewer uses the disposition page and confirms that the contract should be permanently deleted. Option B. The contract reaches the end of its retention period, and the designated reviewers receive a notification to review it. Option C. The records manager configures the retention label to start a disposition review when its retention period ends. And Option D. The retention label is published and applied to the contract. The correct order is 1. The records manager configures the retention label to start a disposition review when its retention period ends. 2. The retention label is published and applied to the contract. 3. The contract reaches the end of its retention period and the designated reviewers receive a notification to review it. And 4. A designated reviewer uses the disposition page and confirms that the contract should be permanently deleted. First, the records manager defines the retention label and selects disposition review as the end of period action. Second, the label is published and applied to the contract, placing the item under those item-level retention settings. Third, when the 7-year period ends, the configured review starts and the designated reviewers are notified. Fourth, because auto-approval is not configured, the designated reviewer must make the final disposition decision and confirms permanent deletion from the disposition page. The review is therefore a mandatory gate between expiration of retention and permanent deletion. Exam clue. When a governance control inserts a manual review at the end of a retention period and auto-approval is disabled, treat expiration as the trigger for an administrative decision, not as the deletion event itself. Question 5. An organization wants Microsoft 365 to automatically and permanently delete Microsoft Teams channel messages when the messages reach 18 months old. The organization does not need to inspect message content for sensitive information or misconduct, and it does not need to evaluate user risk. Which Microsoft Purview solution should the organization use? Choose one. Option A. Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. Option B. Microsoft Purview Communication Compliance. Option C. Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management. Option D. Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management. The correct answer is D. Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management. Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management is designed to retain needed content and delete unneeded content. Retention policies are its core Microsoft 365 mechanism, support teams, and can be configured to automatically permanently delete content after a specified period, matching the 18-month age requirement. Exam clue. When a scenario asks to keep or delete collaboration content according to age, Distinguish a lifecycle rule from controls triggered by content sensitivity, communication behavior, or user risk. Question 6. A company uses Teams-connected SharePoint sites for partner projects. Administrators must apply a visible, restricted partners classification to each workspace. Applying the classification must make the Microsoft 365 group private, disable external sharing from the SharePoint site, and require managed device access. The required Microsoft intra-conditional access dependency for unmanaged device access settings is already configured. The company does not want this workspace classification to label individual files or emails, define when content is deleted, or react to individual sharing events. What should an administrator configure? Choose one. Option A. Create and publish a sensitivity label scoped to files and other data assets and emails, and configure encryption and content markings. Option B. Create and publish a sensitivity label scoped to groups and sites, and configure its privacy, external sharing, and unmanaged device access settings. Option C. Create a data loss prevention policy for SharePoint that detects sensitive content and blocks matching external sharing activity. Option D. Create a retention label and publish an auto-apply policy for content in the project SharePoint sites. The correct answer is B. Create and publish a sensitivity label scoped to groups and sites, and configure its privacy, external sharing, and unmanaged device access settings. The groups and site scope is designed for supported containers, such as Microsoft Teams sites, Microsoft 365 groups, and SharePoint sites. Its protection settings can control privacy, external sharing, and access from unmanaged devices at the workspace level, while the items inside the container do not inherit the container label. Because the required Microsoft Entra conditional access dependency is already configured, configuring and publishing the groups and sites label closes the managed device access outcome. Exam clue. Choose a control whose scope matches the object being governed. Persistent workspace settings call for a container classification. Content lifespan calls for lifecycle governance, and event-triggered blocking calls for an enforcement policy. Close any external dependency, such as conditional access for unmanaged device access, before treating the container label as complete. Question 7. A compliance analyst is validating detections from a custom sensitive information type in Microsoft Purview. The detected files are not encrypted. The analyst must locate the exact detected items and inspect their names and file contents to determine whether the classification is accurate. The analyst can access Content Explorer and already has the Content Explorer List Viewer role, so item locations are visible, but item names and contents are not. The task does not require reviewing user actions on labeled content. What should an administrator do? Select one answer. Option A. Continue using Content Explorer and keep only the existing Content Explorer List Viewer role group membership. Option B. Switch to Activity Explorer and add the analyst to the Content Explorer Content Viewer role group. Option C. Continue using Content Explorer and add the analyst to the Content Explorer Content Viewer role group. Option D. Switch to Activity Explorer and keep only the existing Content Explorer List Viewer role group membership. The correct answer is C. Continue using Content Explorer and add the analyst to the Content Explorer Content Viewer role group. The scenario requires both the correct evidence surface and the required content level permission. Content Explorer presents the classified items, while Content Explorer Content Viewer grants access to item names and contents. Because the detected files are not encrypted, Content Explorer can preview those contents. The analyst already has list-level location visibility, so adding Content Viewer is the necessary change. Exam clue. When choosing an administrative evidence surface, separate questions about what an object is or contains from questions about what happened to it. Close any preview exceptions for the evidence surface, then verify that the assigned role reaches the required level of detail. Question 8. An organization is designing Microsoft Purview retention for 2 requirements. Every document in a selected SharePoint site must receive the same 3-year retention setting measured from when the document was last modified. Separately, individual contract documents across multiple sites must be retained for 7 years beginning when each contract expires. And a records manager must review each contract before it is permanently deleted. Which 2 configurations should the administrator use? Choose 2. Option A. Apply a retention label to each contract, start the 7-year period when the label is applied, and start a disposition review at the end of the period. Option B. Apply an event-based retention label to each contract, use contract expiration as the event that starts the 7-year period, and start a disposition review at the end of the period. Option C. Apply a retention policy to the selected SharePoint site, retain content for 3 years, and start the period from when content was last modified. Option D. Apply an event-based retention label to each contract, use contract expiration as the event that starts the 7-year period, and delete the contract automatically at the end of the period. The correct answers are C. Apply a retention policy to the selected SharePoint site, retain content for 3 years, and start the period from when content was last modified. And B. Apply an event-based retention label to each contract, use contract expiration as the event that starts the 7-year period, and start a disposition review at the end of the period. The site-wide requirement calls for a retention policy because one setting must apply at SharePoint site level. The contract requirement calls for a retention label because it targets individual documents and needs label-only capabilities, an event-based start and disposition review at the end of the retention period. Exam clue: separate the scope, time anchor, and end-of-life cycle action. Use a broad policy for one uniform container-level rule, but use an item-level label when a business event must start the clock or a human review must precede deletion. Question 9. Fabricam is preparing a controlled Microsoft 365 Copilot pilot. Its approved implementation plan requires the security team to establish an AI data risk baseline before changing any protection control. The team must then classify and label the exposed files before a DLP policy can use those labels as conditions. Only after that DLP policy is active will the pilot begin, and the risk team will investigate any resulting pattern of risky AI use. Arrange the Microsoft Purview actions in the required implementation order. Arrange the actions in the correct order. The available actions are: Option A. Use Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management to detect and investigate the pilot user's resulting pattern of risky AI usage. Option B. Configure Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat policy location to restrict processing of files and emails that have the selected sensitivity labels. Option C. Use Microsoft Purview Information Protection to classify the identified files and apply the sensitivity labels required by the protection design. And Option D. Use Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management to assess AI-related data risk and review its prioritized remediation recommendations. The correct order is 1. Use Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management to assess AI-related data risk and review its prioritized remediation recommendations. 2. Use Microsoft Purview Information Protection to classify the identified files and apply the sensitivity labels required by the protection design. 3. Configure Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat policy location to restrict processing of files and emails that have the selected sensitivity labels. And 4. Use Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management to detect and investigate the pilot user's resulting pattern of risky AI usage. The required sequence follows both the plan's explicit dependencies and the role of each Purview capability. Data Security Posture Management establishes and prioritizes the risk baseline. Information Protection classifies and labels the identified data. DLP enforces restrictions by using those labels, and Insider Risk Management detects and investigates the resulting risky user behavior. Exam clue. For a cross-solution sequence, identify what each stage produces for the next one. Assessment produces priorities. Classification produces policy inputs. Enforcement produces governed activity. And investigation consumes the resulting signals. Question 10. A user who has a Microsoft 365 Copilot license can open and summarize Project Atlas files stored in SharePoint. The same user cannot open a restricted finance forecast file. The security team wants the forecast to remain inaccessible to that user and asks what Copilot will do if the user prompts it to summarize the forecast. Which answer correctly describes the behavior and the immediate administrative consequence? Choose one. Option A. Copilot will not use the forecast for grounding. It queries Microsoft Graph in the signed-in user's permission context, so appropriate SharePoint access would have to be granted to that user before Copilot could use the file. Option B. Copilot will use the forecast through application-level Microsoft Graph permissions, even though the user cannot open it. An administrator must add a Copilot-specific deny rule to block it. Option C. Copilot will not use the forecast because it can ground responses only in files attached directly to a prompt. Granting SharePoint access alone would still not make an unattached file eligible. Option D. Copilot will use the forecast after the semantic index refreshes, because the Copilot license provides tenant-wide read access. No SharePoint permission change is required. The correct answer is A. Copilot will not use the forecast for grounding. It queries Microsoft Graph in the signed-in user's permission context, so appropriate SharePoint access would have to be granted to that user before Copilot could use the file. Copilot accesses organizational content through Microsoft Graph using the identity and permissions of the currently signed-in user. It cannot bypass existing SharePoint file permissions. Therefore, the restricted forecast remains unavailable to Copilot for this user, unless an administrator intentionally grants the user appropriate access in SharePoint. Exam clue. When an AI assistant grounds on enterprise content, separate retrieval relevance from authorization. First, identify whose identity is used. Then, apply that identity's existing permissions before considering indexing or prompt context. Question 11. A Microsoft 365 governance lead reviews 4 findings before expanding Microsoft 365 Copilot use. Match each finding to the explanation that most directly accounts for it. Match each finding to one explanation. Each explanation is used exactly once. Requirement 1. A licensed analyst asks about Project Atlas. Copilot incorporates relevant project emails and documents into a response tailored to the analyst's task. Requirement 2. 2 employees submit the same prompt. Only the employee who can open a restricted project site receives details stored there. Requirement 3. A site member can open a SharePoint site, but the site is configured not to appear in search. Its content does not surface through the semantic index for the member's prompt. Requirement 4. An administrator looks for a switch to enable semantic indexing for licensed users, but finds that no administrative enablement is required. The available interpretations are: Option A. A SharePoint site must remain searchable for its content to surface through semantic indexing. Option B. Microsoft automatically enables semantic indexing. A tenant-level index does not require an administrator to turn it on. Option C. Copilot grounds the prompt by accessing Microsoft Graph in the user's tenant, adding relevant organizational context before the model generates a response. And Option D. Copilot can use only content that the signed-in user is already authorized to access under existing Microsoft 365 controls. The correct matches are: Requirement 1, a licensed analyst asks about Project Atlas. Copilot incorporates relevant project emails and documents into a response tailored to the analyst's task. Matches Option C. Copilot grounds the prompt by accessing Microsoft Graph in the user's tenant, adding relevant organizational context before the model generates a response. Requirement 2, two employees submit the same prompt. Only the employee who can open a restricted project site receives details stored there. Matches Option D. Copilot can use only content that the signed-in user is already authorized to access under existing Microsoft 365 controls. Requirement 3. A site member can open a SharePoint site, but the site is configured not to appear in search. Its content does not surface through the semantic index for the member's prompt. Matches Option A. A SharePoint site must remain searchable for its content to surface through semantic indexing. And Requirement 4. An administrator looks for a switch to enable semantic indexing for licensed users, but finds that no administrative enablement is required. Matches Option B. Microsoft automatically enables semantic indexing. A tenant-level index does not require an administrator to turn it on. The matches separate 4 layers that influence Copilot outcomes. Microsoft Graph provides tenant grounding for contextual relevance. Existing permissions trim what each user can access. SharePoint searchability determines whether otherwise authorized site content can surface through semantic indexing. And semantic indexing itself is enabled automatically rather than by an administrator. Exam clue. When several mechanisms affect an AI response, separate retrieval context, identity-based authorization, resource discoverability, and service lifecycle. The scenario clue should identify which layer directly caused the observed outcome. Question 12. A company stores a finance forecast in SharePoint. An employee has permission to open the file, which is labeled highly confidential. The company wants the employee to keep that direct file access, but it does not want Microsoft 365 Copilot to use the file content when generating response summaries. An administrator configures a Microsoft Purview DLP policy for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chat location. The policy detects the highly confidential sensitivity label and uses the Prevent Copilot from Processing Content action. What should the administrator expect? Choose one. Option A. The DLP action removes the employee's SharePoint permission and prevents both direct access and Copilot citations. Option B. Copilot uses the file content in the summary, but applies the highly confidential label to the generated response. Option C. Copilot summarizes the file because the employee can open it and the DLP policy records only an audit event. Option D. Copilot excludes the file content from processing, while the employee's existing permission to open the file remains. The item could still appear as a citation. The correct answer is D. Copilot excludes the file content from processing while the employee's existing permission to open the file remains. The item could still appear as a citation. Microsoft 365 Copilot first operates in the user's security context, so the employee's existing permission is relevant. The Purview DLP policy then adds a separate processing boundary. Content with a selected sensitivity label is not processed or used in the response summary, even though the item could still be cited and the employee's direct access is unchanged. Exam clue. Separate authorization to open a resource from a policy that restricts how an AI assistant may process that resource. A processing control can narrow AI use without changing the user's underlying access. Question 13. An organization is preparing an internal AI assistant that summarizes employee case files. The launch checklist requires both of the following controls. The assistant must retrieve a case file only when the signed-in user already has permission to access it. Before users rely on a summary, the interface must state that the output is AI-generated and describe the assistant's known limitations. Which two responsible AI principal-to-control mappings should the administrator record in the checklist? Choose two. Option A, transparency. Tell users that the summary is AI-generated and describe the assistant's known limitations. Option B, reliability and safety. Preserve the user's existing permission boundary when the assistant retrieves case files. Option C, accountability. Tell users that the summary is AI-generated and describe the assistant's known limitations. Option D, privacy and security. Preserve the user's existing permission boundary when the assistant retrieves case files. The correct answers are D, privacy and security. Preserve the user's existing permission boundary when the assistant retrieves case files. And A, transparency. Tell users that the summary is AI-generated and describe the assistant's known limitations. Privacy and security is the correct principle for preserving access boundaries and protecting sensitive case file data. Transparency is the correct principle for helping users understand that the output comes from AI and for communicating known limitations before they rely on it. Exam clue. When a scenario pairs a data access safeguard with a user-facing disclosure, classify each control by its immediate purpose. Protect information under privacy and security, and explain system behavior or limitations under transparency. Question 14. Priya and Leon enter the same prompt in Microsoft 365 Copilot in Word. Summarize Project North Star's staffing risks. Priya's existing Microsoft 365 permissions include the project's SharePoint site and a relevant email thread. Leon's permissions include neither location. Priya's response contains project details, while Leon's response says it cannot find enough relevant information. No separate Copilot-specific access exception has been configured. Which explanation best accounts for the different responses? Choose one. Option A. Copilot grounds each prompt by accessing Microsoft Graph in the signed-in user's tenant, and can use only content that user is authorized to access. Option B. Copilot grounds only in the Word document that is currently open, so Microsoft Graph permissions to SharePoint and Exchange cannot affect either response. Option C. Copilot uses a separate source permission model, so an administrator must grant each user Copilot-specific access to the SharePoint site and email thread before grounding can use them. Option D. Copilot grounds both prompts with all content in the tenant, then applies each user's permissions only when deciding which citations to display. The correct answer is A. Copilot grounds each prompt by accessing Microsoft Graph in the signed-in user's tenant and can use only content that user is authorized to access. Microsoft 365 Copilot pre-processes a prompt through grounding and accesses Microsoft Graph in the user's tenant. That access remains scoped to the signed-in user. Copilot can use emails, chats, documents, and other content only when that user already has permission to access them. Priya can therefore receive details from the project sources, while Leon cannot. Exam clue. When two users receive different grounded answers to the same prompt, trace both the retrieval mechanism and the caller's authorization context. A service can query an organization-wide data platform while still returning only resources each identity is permitted to access. Question 15. A company stores support playbooks in an external knowledge system. It wants Microsoft 365 Copilot to use the playbooks as grounding content, while ensuring that each employee can receive only information that the employee is authorized to view in the source system. Proposed solution. Deploy a synced Microsoft 365 Copilot connector that ingests the playbooks into Microsoft Graph and associates each external item with an access control list mapped to the appropriate Microsoft Intra users or groups. Does the proposed solution meet all the requirements? Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? Select Yes if the solution meets the requirement. Select No if the solution does not meet the requirement. Option A, no. Option B, yes. The correct answer is B, yes. The solution satisfies both requirements. The synced connector makes the external playbooks available through Microsoft Graph, and the access control lists restrict grounding to content the signed-in employee is authorized to access. Exam clue. When a solution must add an external knowledge source without broadening visibility, look for both an indexing or retrieval mechanism and permission metadata that can trim results for the current user. Question 16. A company stores board research files in SharePoint and applies the board restricted sensitivity label to them. A research analyst is authorized to open the files and must retain that access. The security team requires Microsoft 365 Copilot to stop using the labeled files when generating responses for the analyst, regardless of how a prompt is worded. Which action should an administrator take? Select one answer. Option A, remove the analyst's SharePoint permission to the labeled files so Copilot cannot retrieve them through the analyst's security context. Option B, create a Microsoft Purview DLP policy for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chat location. Configure a rule that detects sensitive information types in prompts and prevents Copilot from processing those prompts. Option C, create an endpoint DLP policy that blocks users from pasting board-restricted content into third-party generative AI websites. Option D, create a Microsoft Purview DLP policy for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chat location. Configure a rule that detects the board-restricted sensitivity label and prevents Copilot from processing the content. The correct answer is D. Create a Microsoft Purview DLP policy for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chat location. Configure a rule that detects the board-restricted sensitivity label and prevents Copilot from processing the content. Microsoft Purview DLP supports the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chat policy location. A rule using content contains sensitivity labels can prevent Copilot from processing labeled files and emails. Copilot prompts still run in the user's security context, so the analyst's existing SharePoint permission remains the access boundary. The DLP rule adds the separate processing restriction required by the scenario. Exam clue. When a user must keep direct access, but an AI assistant must not use a labeled item, distinguish the permission boundary from a product-specific content processing policy. Question 17. An organization deploys an AI assistant for employees. Administrators configure the assistant to retrieve only information that each signed-in employee is authorized to access, and require it to handle that information under the organization's privacy requirements. Which Microsoft Responsible AI principle does this safeguard primarily support? Select one answer. Option A, transparency. Option B, accountability. Option C, privacy and security. Option D, reliability and safety. The correct answer is C, privacy and security. Limiting retrieval to information the employee is authorized to access and handling that information under privacy requirements directly implements the privacy and security principle. Exam clue. When a scenario's decisive control protects information or enforces an authorization boundary, map it to the data protection principle, rather than to disclosure, predictable operation, or governance ownership. Question 18. A company uses Microsoft 365 Copilot to summarize mailbox content. Copilot must exclude every email received from outside the company's accepted domains from grounding, even when the email body contains no detected sensitive information. Employees must retain access to those emails. When Copilot grounds responses in internal Microsoft 365 data, it must not gain access beyond each signed-in user's existing permissions. Which two controls or mechanisms meet the requirements? Choose two. Option A. Use the existing Microsoft 365 permission model as the authorization boundary for Copilot access to internal emails, chats, and documents. Option B. Create a Microsoft Purview DLP rule that detects sensitive information types in prompts and prevents Copilot from processing those prompts. Option C. Create a Microsoft Purview DLP rule for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chat location that detects email received from external users and prevents Copilot from processing that content. Option D. Create a Microsoft Purview DLP rule that detects sensitive information types in prompts and prevents Copilot from performing web searches. The correct answers are C. Create a Microsoft Purview DLP rule for the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chat location that detects email received from external users and prevents Copilot from processing that content, and A. Use the existing Microsoft 365 permission model as the authorization boundary for Copilot access to internal emails, chats, and documents. The complete solution combines the control that excludes externally received email from Copilot processing with the existing user-scoped Microsoft 365 authorization boundary. The DLP rule satisfies the sender domain and unchanged user access constraints, while existing permissions ensure internal grounding does not create broader access. Exam clue. Separate the authorization boundary from the content processing boundary. Preserve the requester's existing access scope, then apply the control whose trigger and processing action exactly match the data channel that must be excluded. Question 19. A company already has an assessment for a regulation in Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager. The compliance team needs to identify the recommended activities that the company, rather than Microsoft, is responsible for completing. The team also needs to assign each activity to an owner and retain implementation evidence. What should a compliance administrator do? Select one answer. Optional A. Open the Improvement Actions page, filter the actions for the applicable regulation, and use each relevant action to assign an owner and record evidence and status. Option B. Export the current assessment report and use the exported file as the system for assigning activity owners and storing implementation evidence. Option C. Change every eligible improvement action from automatic testing to manual testing before assigning owners. Option D. Create a new custom assessment for the regulation and replace the existing assessment before reviewing any improvement actions. The correct answer is A. Open the Improvement Actions page, filter the actions for the applicable regulation, and use each relevant action to assign an owner and record evidence and status. The Improvement Actions page lists the actions that the organization is responsible for completing. Each action contains recommended guidance and can be assigned to a user while storing evidence, notes, and status updates, so it directly satisfies both the responsibility and administration clues. Exam clue. When a scenario asks for the place to turn assessed requirements into assigned, evidence-backed remediation work, choose the action level workflow rather than a reporting export, a replacement assessment, or a testing mode change. Question 20. An administrator must identify Microsoft 365 files that contain credit card numbers and determine whether any of those files are accessible to external users before the organization configures protection policies. Proposed solution. In Microsoft Purview Data Explorer, search for the credit card number sensitive information type, filter the results by location, and review each file's owner and sharing status. Does the proposed solution meet all the requirements? Determine whether the proposed solution meets the requirement. Option A, no. Option B, yes. The correct answer is B, yes. Yes is correct because Data Explorer supports searching for sensitive information types across Microsoft 365 locations, narrowing results with filters, and reviewing file ownership and sharing status. Those capabilities satisfy both parts of the requirement, locating files with credit card numbers and determining whether they are externally accessible. Exam clue. When a requirement asks where sensitive content resides and how it is exposed before controls are applied, choose the discovery and visibility capability, rather than a policy creation or enforcement capability. Question 21. A compliance team receives notice that an employee with broad access to financial planning files is leaving the organization. The team must evaluate patterns of that employee's activity by correlating user and security signals against policy-defined risk indicators, rather than reacting only to a single sensitive content rule match. If triage shows that the activity requires deeper review, the team must keep related alerts for the employee together in a user-focused investigation record. Which two actions should the team take? Choose two. Option A. Create a communication compliance policy and investigate the employee in the flagged messages reviewer dashboard. Option B. After triaging an insider risk management alert, open a new insider risk management case for the employee, or add the alert to that employee's existing case. Option C. Create a Microsoft Purview data loss prevention policy that alerts when a financial file matches a sensitive information rule. Option D. Create an insider risk management policy by using the Data Theft by Departing Users template and include the employee in scope. The correct answers are D. Create an insider risk management policy by using the Data Theft by Departing Users template and include the employee in scope, and B. After triaging an insider risk management alert, open a new insider risk management case for the employee or add the alert to that employee's existing case. Creating the Departing User Insider Risk Management policy satisfies the requirement to evaluate policy-defined triggering events and risk indicators in the employee's context. Opening or updating an insider risk management case satisfies the separate requirement to place alerts that merit deeper review into a single user investigation record. Exam clue. When a scenario combines contextual behavior signals with a follow-up record centered on one person, identify the risk correlation control first and then the investigation container used after triage. Do not substitute a content rule alert or a message review queue. Question 22. An organization is triaging Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention (DLP) alerts. Match each administrative need to the surface that best addresses it. Match each administrative need to the correct surface. Each choice is used once. Requirement 1. Open one DLP alert. Review all events associated with it and verify whether an event is a true match or a false positive. Requirement 2. Review DLP-related activities and filter them for reporting purposes. Requirement 3. Manage DLP alerts grouped with related signals into incidents and take in-place remediation actions on users, files, or devices. The available interpretations are: Option A, Microsoft Purview Activity Explorer. Option B, Microsoft Defender XDR Incident Queue. And option C, Microsoft Purview DLP Alerts Dashboard. The correct matches are Requirement 1, open one DLP alert, review all events associated with it, and verify whether an event is a true match or a false positive. Matches option C, Microsoft Purview DLP Alerts Dashboard. Requirement 2, review DLP-related activities and filter them for reporting purposes. Matches option A, Microsoft Purview Activity Explorer. And requirement 3, manage DLP alerts grouped with related signals into incidents, and take in-place remediation actions on users, files, or devices. Matches option B, Microsoft Defender XDR Incident Queue. The three mappings follow the required administrative scope. Use the Purview DLP Alerts dashboard for event-level review and match verification within one alert, Activity Explorer for filtered analysis of DLP activity, and the Defender XDR Incident Queue for correlated incident management and in-place remediation. Exam clue. Choose an administrative surface by the unit of work, a single alert and its events, activity telemetry across time, or a correlated incident that requires remediation. Question 23. A Microsoft Purview communication compliance policy is active. A reviewer is triaging a new pending policy match and must determine the exact policy condition that caused this specific message to be flagged before choosing a remediation action. The reviewer must not change the policy configuration or rely on an aggregate summary. What should the reviewer do? Choose one. Option A. Open the Communication Compliance Alerts page and use the grouped alerts severity to identify the triggering condition. Option B. Open the Communication Compliance Reports page and use its activity and status widgets to identify the triggering condition. Option C. Open the Policies Pending tab, select the message, and review the alert message bar at the top of the Source tab. Option D. Open the Policy Settings panel and infer the triggering condition from the policy's configured conditions. The correct answer is C. Open the Policies Pending tab, select the message, and review the alert message bar at the top of the Source tab. Selecting the pending message and reviewing the alert message bar on its Source tab directly reveals the condition, or conditions, that cause that message's policy match. This satisfies the item-level evidence requirement before remediation without changing policy settings. Exam clue. When several administrative surfaces contain similar risk terminology, match the requested evidence granularity to the surface. Use the selected item's evidence view for the exact trigger, dashboards for prioritization, reports for aggregates, and settings for configured logic. Question 24. A compliance analyst learns that a document which previously had the confidential sensitivity label now has the general label. The analyst must use Microsoft Purview Activity Explorer to find recorded evidence that a user changed the document's sensitivity label. Which activity should the analyst select in the activity filter? Choose one. Option A, DLP rule matched. Option B, file read. Option C, files discovered. Option D, label changed. The correct answer is D, label changed. Select label changed. Microsoft documents label changed as an Activity Explorer activity for a label that is upgraded, downgraded, or removed. That directly matches the document's change from confidential to general. Exam clue. When a monitoring question asks for evidence of a state transition, choose the event that names the transition itself, not an access event, a policy detection event, or an inventory discovery event. Question 25. An organization is beginning a data governance review of employees' use of third-party generative AI apps. The Microsoft Purview browser extension is installed, devices are onboarded to Microsoft Purview, Extend Your Insights for data discovery has been enabled, and data has had time to populate. Before choosing any enforcement control or opening an investigation, the security team needs baseline evidence showing which AI apps are being used and whether sensitive data is being sent to them. What should a Microsoft Purview administrator do? Choose one. Option A, create a communication compliance policy to review inappropriate AI prompts and responses. Option B, configure an endpoint DLP policy to block sensitive information from being shared with AI sites. Option C, use DSPM for AI reports, then open report details in Activity Explorer. Option D, open an insider risk management investigation for users with risky AI activity. The correct answer is C. Use DSPM for AI reports, then open report details in Activity Explorer. The requirement is discovery before enforcement or investigation. Because the Purview browser extension and device onboarding are complete, Extend Your Insights for Data Discovery is enabled, and data has had time to populate. DSPM for AI reports expose metrics such as total interactions, visits, and sensitive interactions per AI app. Opening a report's details in Activity Explorer supplies the supporting activity evidence, so this action directly satisfies both parts of the request. Exam clue. When a scenario asks for visibility before action, and the discovery telemetry prerequisites and data population weight are already satisfied, choose the reporting and activity evidence surface first. Reserve blocking, investigation, and conduct review tools for scenarios that explicitly require those consequences. Question 26. A compliance analyst must locate email messages and files that mention Project Kestrel. The relevant content can be in Exchange Online mailboxes and SharePoint sites. The analyst needs search results only. The content does not need to be placed on hold, added to a review set, or exported. Proposed solution. In Microsoft Purview eDiscovery, create a content search that includes the Exchange Online mailboxes and SharePoint sites, and use Project Kestrel as a keyword condition. Does the proposed solution meet all the requirements? Does the solution meet the requirement? Option A, no. Option B, yes. The correct answer is B, yes. The solution meets the requirement because Content Search supports keyword searches across mailboxes and SharePoint sites, directly locating the requested emails and files. The scenario explicitly excludes downstream actions, such as holds, review sets, and export. Exam clue. Match the tool to the immediate outcome. Locating items is search. Preventing deletion is preservation. Organizing evidence is review. And moving results outside the system is export. Question 27. Fabricam already has a Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager assessment for an applicable regulation. The compliance administrator must identify the recommended activities that Fabricam is responsible for, assign each activity to an owner, and keep implementation evidence and status in a centralized record. Eligible actions must remain on automatic testing. Which action should the administrator take? Choose one. Option A. Change every eligible improvement action from automatic to manual testing before assigning owners, uploading evidence, and updating status. Option B. Export the improvement actions to Excel and use the downloaded workbook as the sole owner, evidence, and status repository without opening the action records. Option C. Configure Compliance Manager alert policies for score and status changes, and use the resulting alert emails as the owner assignments and evidence records. Option D. On the Improvement Actions page, filter for the applicable regulation. Open the relevant organization-managed actions, assign owners, add evidence, and update each action status. The correct answer is D. On the Improvement Actions page, filter for the applicable regulation, open the relevant organization-managed actions, assign owners, add evidence, and update each action's status. Compliance Manager's Improvement Actions page identifies the improvement actions managed by the organization. Opening an action provides the controls to assign an owner, retain evidence, and track implementation or testing status, while eligible actions can continue to use automatic testing. Exam clue. When a scenario requires ownership, evidence, and progress tracking for recommended remediation work, choose the live action level workflow rather than an export, notification channel, or unnecessary testing mode change. Question 28. Contoso has already configured the built-in credit card number sensitive information type. After moving its review process to the current Microsoft Purview Information Protection Explorer, a compliance analyst must obtain a current snapshot of matching items, identify which SharePoint sites contain them, and export the visible listing. The analyst must use the current Explorer rather than a classic surface, must not open item contents, and must not review historical user activity, or create, tune, or enforce any classification or protection control. Which action should the analyst take? Choose one. Option A. In Information Protection, open Data Explorer. Filter for the existing credit card number sensitive information type. Select the SharePoint data source, drill down to the site and item list, and export the focused pane. Option B. In Data Lifecycle Management, open Content Explorer Classic. Filter for the existing credit card number sensitive information type. Drill down through SharePoint locations and export the focused pane. Option C. Open Activity Explorer. Filter for SharePoint and the credit card number sensitive information type, and export the last 30 days of matching activity. Option D. In Data Explorer, train a new classifier from sample files, and then use its matches to locate the SharePoint items. The correct answer is A. In Information Protection, open Data Explorer, filter for the existing credit card number sensitive information type, select the SharePoint data source, drill down to the site and item list, and export the focused pane. The current Data Explorer surface is the only option that matches all of the required boundaries. It retrieves a current snapshot, filters an existing sensitive information type, drills into SharePoint locations and items, and exports the visible list without requiring content preview, activity history review, or a change to classification or protection controls. Exam clue. When several administrative tools share the same data labels and filters, match the requested evidence object and time model first. Use an inventory surface for a current item and location snapshot, an activity surface for historical events, and a configuration surface only when the scenario authorizes changing detection or protection behavior. Question 29. A compliance team has an active Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management policy for departing users. The policy detects potentially risky copying of sensitive project files to a USB device and generates an alert. The team must handle the signal through the Insider Risk Management alert and case workflow, rather than begin in a DLP alert queue, a communication compliance review, or a Microsoft Defender incident. Arrange the actions in the order the team should perform them, from initial alert triage through final response. The available actions are Option A. Open the alert and review its risk details and associated activity timeline in Activity Explorer. Option B. Based on the case findings, take the appropriate response, such as sending a notice, escalating the case, or resolving it. Option C. In Insider Risk Management, filter the Alerts dashboard for alerts with the Needs Review status and prioritize the applicable alert by severity. Option D. Confirm the alert and create an Insider Risk Management case for the user. And Option E. Open the case and investigate the user's risk history and the content associated with the alert activities. The correct order is 1. In Insider Risk Management, filter the Alerts dashboard for alerts with the Needs Review status and prioritize the applicable alert by severity. 2. Open the alert and review its risk details and associated activity timeline in Activity Explorer. 3. Confirm the alert and create an Insider Risk Management case for the user. 4. Open the case and investigate the user's risk history and the content associated with the alert activities. And 5. Based on the case findings, take the appropriate response, such as sending a notice, escalating the case, or resolving it. This sequence follows the Insider Risk Management lifecycle. Locate a policy-generated alert needing review. Inspect the alert evidence. Confirm it into a case. Investigate the consolidated case evidence and only then take a response. It keeps the signal in the Insider Risk Management control plane instead of substituting a DLP, communication compliance, or defender workflow. Exam clue. When several tools can surface similar behavior, first identify which policy generated the signal. Then order actions by lifecycle state. Triage the alert, promote supported findings into a case, investigate the case, and respond only after the evidence is reviewed. Question 30. A compliance administrator is triaging Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention (DLP) alerts in the standard dashboard view. The administrator has the required roles, including the additional role needed to inspect matched sensitive content. Match each task to the DLP alert surface or control that the administrator should use. Match each task to one surface or control. Use each choice exactly once. Requirement 1. Before opening an alert, narrow the list to the relevant policy violations and arrange the displayed alert properties. Requirement 2. Review every event aggregated into one alert, open an event's details, and mark whether the policy match is true or a false positive. Requirement 3. After investigating, review what happened and who caused the match, then add a comment, assign ownership, and finish the alert as resolved. Requirement 4. Inspect the sensitive text and surrounding context that caused a selected event to match, using the administrator's extra content viewing permission. The available interpretations are Option A, Overview tab and its View Details workflow controls. Option B, Content Preview and matched sensitive content and context. Option C, Events tab and the Event Actions menu. And Option D, DLP Alerts dashboard, filter, column, and sort controls. The correct matches are Requirement 1. Before opening an alert, narrow the list to the relevant policy violations and arrange the displayed alert properties. Matches Option D, DLP Alerts dashboard filter, column, and sort controls. Requirement 2. Review every event aggregated into one alert. Open an event's details and mark whether the policy match is true or a false positive. Matches Option C, Events tab and the Event Actions menu. Requirement 3. After investigating, review what happened and who caused the match. Then add a comment, assign ownership, and finish the alert as resolved. Matches Option A, Overview tab and its View Details workflow controls. And Requirement 4. Inspect the sensitive text and surrounding context that caused a selected event to match, using the administrator's extra content viewing permission. Matches Option B, Content Preview and matched sensitive content and context. Use the dashboard's list controls to find relevant alerts, events to inspect and verify the constituent policy matches, overview workflow controls to manage the alert through resolution, and the permission-gated matched content controls to inspect sensitive evidence. Exam clue. When several administration surfaces display overlapping information, identify the requested operations level, list discovery, child record verification, protected evidence inspection, or parent record workflow state. Question 31. A compliance reviewer receives a Microsoft Purview Communication Compliance Alert for a policy that detects unauthorized disclosure. The alert may represent more than one detected message. The reviewer must identify and inspect the individual messages that matched the policy before deciding how to remediate them. Proposed solution. In communication compliance, the reviewer opens the Policies page, selects the policy associated with the alert, and reviews the policy matches on the Pending tab of the Policy Details page. Does the solution meet the requirement? Select Yes if the proposed solution meets the requirement. Otherwise, select No. Option A, No. Option B, Yes. The correct answer is B, yes. Communication compliance alerts are grouped by policy matches, and one alert generally consists of multiple matches. The proposed workflow correctly starts on communication compliance minus policies, selects the policy associated with the alert, and reviews the individual matches on the Policy Details page's Pending tab. Exam clue. When a monitoring system separates aggregate alerts from underlying events, open the policy surface that owns those events and evaluate the individual pending matches, rather than treating the alert count as the event count. Question 32. A compliance administrator learns that a user changed a SharePoint document's sensitivity label from highly confidential to general during the last 7 days. The administrator needs the Microsoft Purview view that transforms unified audit log data into a historical view of labeled content activity and can be filtered by user and activity type. No DLP alert was generated, and the administrator must not change any policy. Which action should the administrator take? Choose one. Option A. Open the DLP Alerts dashboard to investigate a policy match alert, and then adjust the DLP policy. Option B. Open Content Explorer and browse the items that currently have the general sensitivity label. Option C. Open Audit and start a search job for sensitivity label audit records performed by the user. Option D. Open Activity Explorer, set the date range to the last 7 days, and filter by the user and the label changed activity. The correct answer is D. Open Activity Explorer. Set the date range to the last 7 days and filter by the user and the label changed activity. Activity Explorer is designed to monitor what happens to labeled content. It presents transformed, unified audit log data as a historical activity view, supports date range, activity type, sensitivity label, and user filters, and reports label changed events that include upgrades and downgrades. Exam clue. When several administrative surfaces use the same telemetry, identify the requested evidence object, a historical activity view, a current inventory snapshot, raw event records, or an enforcement workflow. A no change constraint rules out configuration actions. Question 33. A company allows Microsoft 365 Copilot and has evidence that employees also visit non-Microsoft generative AI sites. Before changing any protection controls, the security architect must use Microsoft Purview to 1. Inspect AI prompts and responses together with sensitivity and policy match context, and 2. Identify organization-wide patterns of sensitive data use and user behavior across AI interactions. This phase must not block an interaction or start a person-focused risk investigation. Which 2 actions should the architect take? Choose 2. Option A. Configure a data loss prevention policy to warn or block users who share sensitive information with generative AI sites. Option B. Use the Insider Risk Management Risky AI Usage policy to score users and start a user-level investigation. Option C. Review the DSPM data risk assessment reports. Option D. Review the AI interaction views in DSPM Activity Explorer. The correct answers are D. Review the AI interaction views in DSPM Activity Explorer, and C. Review the DSPM Data Risk Assessment reports. DSPM Activity Explorer supplies interaction-level visibility into prompts, responses, sensitivity labels, and policy matches, while DSPM Data Risk Assessment reports reveal broader sensitive data usage and user behavior patterns. Together, they provide the two required visibility layers without moving into DLP enforcement or a user-focused insider risk management investigation. Exam clue. When a scenario asks for visibility before control changes, separate interaction-level evidence and aggregate posture reporting from enforcement policies and person-focused investigations. Question 34. Fabricam's legal team must find in-place email messages and SharePoint documents whose content contains the project code Meridian-27. The team needs to preview the matching items from two employees' Exchange Online mailboxes and a project SharePoint site. It does not need evidence of who accessed or changed the items. Proposed solution. In the Microsoft Purview portal, open Audit. Create an audit search, enter Meridian-27 in keyword search, select the two employees in Users, enter the project site in File, Folder, or Site, and use the returned audit records as the list of matching messages and documents. Does the proposed solution meet all the requirements? Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? Option A, no. Option B, yes. The correct answer is A, no. Microsoft Purview Audit Search returns audit log event data for user and administrator activities. To satisfy the requirement, the team should create a search in eDiscovery, select the relevant Exchange Online mailboxes and SharePoint site, use Meridian-27 as a keyword condition, run the search, and preview the matching in-place content. Exam clue. When two administrative tools both offer search, identify the object returned. Content discovery tools return matching items, while audit tools return records of actions involving items. Question 35. A compliance administrator receives an aggregate Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention (DLP) alert after several activities matched the same DLP rule. During initial triage, the administrator must review the evidence for every activity associated with this alert before deciding whether it is a true match or a false positive. The administrator must not change the DLP policy yet. What should the administrator do first? Choose one. Option A. Select the first event, use actions to classify the alert as a false positive, and review the remaining events only if the alert is escalated. Option B. Use the alert's Details and Overview tabs to review the policy match summary and record the verdict from that summary. Option C. Open the alert in the DLP Alerts dashboard. Select the Events tab and review the details of each associated event before using the available alert actions. Option D. Filter the DLP Alerts dashboard by the matched policy name and use each resulting alert row as the evidence for an underlying activity. The correct answer is C. Open the alert in the DLP Alerts dashboard, select the Events tab, and review the details of each associated event before using the available alert actions. An aggregate alert can contain multiple associated events. In the standard DLP Alerts dashboard, the Events tab lists all events associated with the alert and allows the administrator to open each event for detailed evidence. The administrator can then use the available actions to make a supported true match or false positive decision. Exam clue. When one operational alert can aggregate several underlying activities, distinguish queue filters and summaries from the event-level evidence view. Investigate all child events before changing configuration or recording a final disposition. Question 36. Your organization has onboarded devices to Microsoft Purview and installed the required browser extension. The data security team now needs an organization-wide baseline showing which third-party generative AI sites employees visit and whether they paste or upload sensitive content. The team must collect visibility in audit mode first. It must not block user activity, make risky prompt user scoring the primary workflow, or limit collection to Copilot in Fabric and Security Copilot. Which action should you take in Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI? Choose one. Option A. Select Detect Risky Interactions in AI Apps and create the DSPM for AI. Detect Risky AI Usage Insider Risk Management Policy. Option B. From Overview, select Extend Your Insights for Data Discovery. Activate the associated one-click policies and review their results in Reports and Activity Explorer after data is collected. Option C. Select Secure Interactions for Microsoft Copilot experiences and create the collection policy that captures prompts and responses. Option D. Select Fortify Your Data Security and deploy the default DLP policies that block sensitive information from AI sites. The correct answer is B. From Overview, select Extend Your Insights for Data Discovery, activate the associated one-click policies, and review the results in Reports and Activity Explorer after data is collected. Extend Your Insights for Data Discovery is the DSPM for AI entry point for one-click policies that collect information about users visiting third-party generative AI sites and sending sensitive information to them. Its default discovery policies include audit mode detection of sensitive content pasted or uploaded to AI sites and detection of browser visits to AI sites. The resulting data can be examined in Reports and Activity Explorer, satisfying the visibility first and no block constraints. Exam clue. When a scenario asks for a baseline without changing behavior, identify the telemetry and reporting workflow first. Reject options that enforce policy, score individual risk, or collect evidence from a narrower workload than the requested scope. Question 37. An investigation team needs to find in existing Exchange Online mailboxes and SharePoint sites emails and documents whose content contains the project codename North Star. The team must preview matching in-place content before deciding whether to add anything to a review set or export it. They do not need records of who accessed or changed the items. Which action should the eDiscovery administrator take first? Choose one. Option A. Export the results of an eDiscovery search as a package for review outside the investigation team. Option B. Run an audit search using keyword search plus user and site criteria and inspect the resulting activity records. Option C. Create and run an eDiscovery search scoped to the Exchange Online mailboxes and SharePoint sites. Add a keyword condition for North Star and generate a sample to preview matching items. Option D. Send responsive items from a completed eDiscovery search to a review set and filter them there. The correct answer is C. Create and run an eDiscovery search scoped to the Exchange Online mailboxes and SharePoint sites. Add a keyword condition for North Star and generate a sample to preview matching items. The requested object is existing content whose body matches a keyword, not evidence of user activity. Search in eDiscovery can scope Exchange Online and SharePoint, apply keyword conditions, and preview a sample of matching in-place content. Sending results to a review set or exporting them occurs only after relevant data has been found. Exam clue. When several investigation tools expose similar keyword or location filters, identify whether the task asks for the content objects themselves or for activity records about those objects. Then check whether the requested action is search time or downstream processing. Question 38. An organization wants to troubleshoot potential oversharing across its SharePoint and OneDrive sites. An administrator needs both a current view of the sites with the broadest user access and a view of the sites where users created the most new sharing links during the last 28 days. The administrator must identify the affected sites before restricting access or asking site owners to change permissions. Which two data access governance tools should the administrator use? Choose two. Option A, Site Permissions Report. Option B, Sharing Links Reports. Option C, Site Access Review. Option D, Restricted Access Control. The correct answers are A, Site Permissions Report, and B, Sharing Links Reports. The Site Permissions Report supplies the requested current state baseline by identifying sites with the broadest user access. Sharing Links Reports supply the requested recent activity view by identifying sites with the most newly created sharing links during the last 28 days. Together, they reveal both existing exposure and emerging sharing activity before remediation begins. Exam clue. When a task asks you to diagnose a risk before taking action, choose observability tools that cover both current state and recent activity, and exclude controls or review workflows that change the state. Question 39. A SharePoint administrator needs evidence showing which SharePoint sites had the highest number of newly created links that let recipients access files or folders without signing in. The evidence must focus on recent sharing activity, and the administrator must not change permissions or start remediation. Which action should the administrator take? Select one answer. Option A. In the SharePoint Admin Center, go to Reports, Data Access Governance, Sharing Links, and manually run the Anyone Links report. Option B. In the SharePoint Admin Center, go to Reports, Data Access Governance, Activity Reports, and run Shared with Everyone except external users. Option C. In the SharePoint Admin Center, go to Reports, Data Access Governance, Snapshot Reports, and run Site Permissions across your organization. Option D. From an existing Data Access Governance report, initiate a Site Access Review so site owners can update permissions. The correct answer is A. In the SharePoint Admin Center, go to Reports, Data Access Governance, Sharing Links, and manually run the Anyone Links report. The SharePoint Admin Center exposes data access governance under Reports. Sharing Links activity reports identify sites where users created the most new sharing links during the recent activity window. And the Anyone Links report specifically covers links that allow access without signing in. Manually running that report retrieves the requested evidence without changing access settings or initiating remediation. Exam clue. When several governance reports share one admin surface, match the measured object and time window first. Then distinguish evidence collection from downstream remediation. Question 40. A company has a SharePoint site for a confidential acquisition. The site already has a complex permission structure, and some people outside the acquisition team still have prior permissions or old shared links. A Microsoft Intra security group named Acquisition Approved contains the only people who may open the site. The administrator must add a group-based access boundary without replacing the site's current permissions. A user should be able to open content only when the user both has an existing site or content permission and belongs to Acquisition Approved. Which SharePoint Advanced Management capability should the administrator configure? Select one answer. Option A. Replace the site's current SharePoint permissions with permissions granted only to Acquisition Approved. Option B. Enable restricted content discovery for the site. Option C. Generate a data access governance permission state report for the site. Option D. Configure restricted access control for the site and specify Acquisition Approved as the control group. The correct answer is D. Configure restricted access control for the site and specify acquisition approved as the control group. Restricted access control is the SharePoint Advanced Management capability that restricts a site to specified Microsoft Entra security groups or Microsoft 365 groups. It remains conjunctive with ordinary authorization. Membership in the control group does not grant access by itself, and a permitted user outside the control group is blocked, even when the user has a prior permission or shared link. Exam clue. When a scenario says to preserve existing permissions but require an additional condition for access, look for a conjunctive policy gate. The user must satisfy both the original authorization and the new policy boundary. Question 41. An organization is investigating possible oversharing across SharePoint and OneDrive. The administrator must first identify the sites with the broadest current exposure and then identify the sites where users created the most new sharing links during the last 28 days. For this triage step, the administrator must only collect evidence. The administrator must not change access or delegate permission remediation to site owners. Which two SharePoint Advanced Management tools should the administrator use? Choose two. Option A, the Sharing Links Activity Report. Option B, a Site Access Review. Option C, Restricted Access Control. Option D, the Site Permissions for Your Organization Report. The correct answers are D, the Site Permissions for Your Organization Report, and A, the Sharing Links Activity Report. The Site Permissions for Your Organization report supplies the required snapshot of current permissions and identifies the broadest exposure. The Sharing Links Activity Report supplies the required 28-day view of new sharing link activity. Together, they meet both evidence requirements without initiating remediation or changing access. Exam clue. When a scenario separates discovery from remediation, match each requirement to the measured object and time window first. Reject controls that change access or launch a remediation workflow when the task is evidence only. Question 42. A SharePoint administrator must retrieve evidence about data access and sharing without changing permissions, sharing settings, links, or policies. Match each evidence request to the Data Access Governance Report and run action that meets the request. Match each evidence request to one report and run action. Use each choice once. Requirement 1. Find SharePoint sites with the broadest current user access, including site-level and item-level permissions. Requirement 2. Find SharePoint sites where users created the most specific people links for people outside the organization during the last 28 days. Requirement 3. Find SharePoint sites where content was shared with all internal users during the last 28 days. The available interpretations are: Option A, shared with everyone except external users. Select View Reports, select Create Report, configure the report, and select Create and Run. Option B, site permissions across your organization. Select View Reports, then select Create Report for the first run, or Run Reports for a refresh. And Option C, Sharing Links Activity. Manually run the specific people links shared externally report. The correct matches are: Requirement 1. Find SharePoint sites with the broadest current user access, including site-level and item-level permissions. Matches Option B, Site Permissions across your organization. Select View Reports, then select Create Report for the first run, or Run Reports for a refresh. Requirement 2. Find SharePoint sites where users created the most specific people links for people outside the organization during the last 28 days. Matches Option C, Sharing Links Activity. Manually run the specific people links shared externally report. And Requirement 3. Find SharePoint sites where content was shared with all internal users during the last 28 days. Matches Option A, shared with everyone except external users. select View Reports, select Create Report, configure the report, and select Create and Run. The three mappings distinguish a current permission state snapshot from two recent activity signals. Site permissions across your organization supplies the broad current baseline. The specific people links shared externally activity report measures newly created links for outside recipients. The Everyone Except External Users activity report measures recent organization-wide internal sharing. Each selected action runs the matching evidence report and does not remediate or change access. Exam clue. For any governance report task, identify the measured object and time anchor first. Use a snapshot for current state and an activity report for recent events. Then select the report whose entity matches the requested signal without changing operational state. Question 43. An organization has a SharePoint site for a confidential finance project. Some people outside the finance security group already have permission to the site or possess a shared link. The SharePoint administrator must enforce a boundary so that only members of a specified Microsoft Intra security group can access the site and its content, including when users open files or search for content. Which SharePoint Advanced Management capability should the administrator use? Select one answer. Option A. Generate a data access governance permission state report for the site. Option B. Apply a restricted access control policy to the site and specify the finance security group as the control group. Option C. Edit the site's standard SharePoint permissions and add the finance security group as a site member. Option D. Enable restricted content discovery for the site. The correct answer is B. Apply a restricted access control policy to the site and specify the finance security group as the control group. Restricted access control is the SharePoint Advanced Management capability designed to restrict a SharePoint site's access to specified Microsoft 365 groups or Microsoft Entra security groups. Users outside the configured control group cannot access the site or its content even when prior permissions or a shared link would otherwise allow access. Exam clue. When a scenario says existing permission or a shared link must not bypass a named group boundary, choose the policy that adds an access gate above ordinary permissions rather than a report or discovery-only control. Question 44. A company stores confidential acquisition documents on a SharePoint site. Some employees outside the approved acquisition team still have site permissions or old sharing links. The SharePoint administrator must enforce a site-level boundary so that a user can open the site or its content only when the user both has existing permission and belongs to an approved Microsoft Entra security group. Which SharePoint Advanced Management capability should the administrator use? Select one answer. Option A. Initiate a site access review and delegate the review to the site owner. Option B. Apply restricted content discovery to the site. Option C. Apply restricted access control to the site and specify the approved Microsoft Entra security group. Option D. Generate a data access governance permission state report for the site. The correct answer is C. Apply restricted access control to the site and specify the approved Microsoft Entra security group. Restricted access control is the SharePoint Advanced Management capability that limits a SharePoint site to specified Microsoft 365 groups or Microsoft Entra security groups. It acts in addition to ordinary SharePoint permissions. Membership in the control group does not grant permission, and an existing permission or link does not bypass the control group requirement. Exam clue. When a scenario contrasts enforcement with discovery, reporting, or review, identify whether it requires a policy that evaluates access at use time. If access must require both an existing resource permission and membership in an approved control group, choose the group-based access control policy rather than an insight or review feature. You have completed this practice exam. Every miss is useful evidence. Review the questions that felt uncertain, identify the service boundary or governance clue you missed, and return to the matching Microsoft Learn objective before your next attempt. Thank you for practicing with WebLizard Lab's Cert Lab. Continue with Practice Exam 3, Copilot and Agent Administration. Keep building exam confidence, one evidence-backed decision at a time.